Okay, now that we've covered a few of the commands, the basic commands, right? One of the very important things to note here is that SQL has a typical nature, which is that if you look at the way it is written, the query is written. So it's sort of like, you start with select and then from, right? And something like that. I hope you've got a bit of picture that you start with select, okay, whatever you want. But the way SQL actually operates is in this order. So even if you write SQL first, select first, it does not process select uh, as the first command. It looks for the from command first, then it looks for where, the conditions, and then the select, then order by, and then limit. Okay, so again, if you think of it from a logical point of view, that's how I try to remember that you would first want to have a database with you. Okay, you first need to have an Excel sheet with you, and that is the from which table. That is a priority. You cannot say that, I want to know some information without the database. So select is simply giving you the data which is displayed or which is read by the set command. But first you need to know the from, then it processes where, the conditions, then it displays it. Now once the information is displayed or is ready to be displayed, then you sort it out and then you use the limitations on it, top 5, top 10. So just keep that in mind. You will get the hang of it once you start processing it. And the reason why we need to know is that at times that there could be so these are very simple queries that we're talking about here. But once you start probably work on a project in SEM 2, SEM 3, SEM 4, or even SEM 1, you would face certain errors, which would be because of these reasons. And you will have to rearrange your queries so that this thing is executed first. So for now, just keep it in mind. Again, from exams point of view, this could be asked. Okay. All right. Now, again, we're looking at the same table again. Citizen ID, annual income. Okay. So I've put in these queries in between so that we could run it and refresh our memories on what the table looked like. So we know that citizen ID, annual income, these are the 3 columns. Now what I want to talk about here is the statement called case statement. Okay. Now case is a combination of the if then clause statement in Python. If you remember, if then, if this happened, then this, and also it helps in adding a new column to the table. So you see there are only 3 columns here, right? And let's say if I want to add another column. So what I want to do, let's say somebody has asked me to classify the citizens if they're poor. I should not say that, but let's say somebody has asked me if they're poor or lower middle class or middle class and upper middle class, let's say, based on their annual income. Okay. And add a new column here with that classification. How would I do that? So this is where the case statement helps you. So if you look at it, what is happening here is that you are selecting the entire table. Basically, what you want is all the fourth column as well. So that's why star here. Otherwise, you can put it something else as well. Just one column name, annual income or whatever. But let's say you want all the columns here. So all the stuff we're putting in star here. So we're starting with the case statement, which begins with you mention the word case, and then you start writing when, then, when, and then. Okay, so so the way it works is you are writing it as when annual income is less than or equal to 50,000, then called poor when annual income is between, see this is where it is helpful, between 50,000 and 5 lakhs, then call that category as lower middle class, between 5 lakhs and 10 lakhs middle class, when we're greater than 10 lakhs then upper middle class, and then finally we end it as end as category. So when this end as helps in giving the name to the column. So I want to call that column as category. So let me run this to make it more clear. So this is how the fourth column is inserted. Okay. So the column name is category and as, okay, I could call it anything. Let me call it classes. Let me call it classes. So if I run it, so the name of the column is changed. So this is used to, okay. So that's the utility of the case statement. This is what the syntax looks like, and then finally we end up with from which table. Okay. So any questions on this? I think I'll pause here in case anybody has any doubts. Now let's talk about another command called group by, because we're talking about the aggregate functions, average, maximum, right? And we're also talking about the categories, this particular category, right? These are the different categories that we have viewed, probably use to analyze data. We also need to talk about something called group by. So group by helps in combining uh, the various categories. So now here you see that the lower middle class is mentioned in quite a few of rows. Okay, the entire query remains as it was earlier that we discussed for case. All I've done is I've added this one single command, group by category. So what I want to do is combine the information as per this particular column. Again, let me run it, then it will be more clear. So this is how the analysis would look like. So what I did was in the first table, I added a new column. Again, think of it as Excel. In Excel, you would find it very easy, right? So we are doing exactly the same thing. With SQL, it's going to take some more time to practice, but then all of us will get a hang of it. So yeah. Okay. So because these were the major categories, now we know what their total income is. So here I have added another aggregate function, sum. The column name is annual income, and then I use the alias as well, which is total income. That's why the name is here, and group by. So if you see now, I'm trying to build on whatever we've discussed so far. Aggregate function, aliases, group by, and the case statement. Pretty simple to understand. Okay. Then, okay, I've mentioned that there is another example of group by. What I'm trying to do here is trying to find out. So if you look at the query, let's say if you look at the query and really don't understand what the table looks like, you can still know that you are doing some grouping by the gender. Okay, so male, female, you know, those were the values. Let me run this thing. So this was the original table. It had gender, this column. I want to group it by this column. So what I'm doing here is that I want to group by gender where these people are alive. I don't know why I've used condition so much. Probably because I'm working late night, so I'm maybe watching a bit of horror movies and all that. So anyway, so the statement is that is alive, true. So how many of men and women are alive? 426 and 227. Okay. Again, to reiterate, is alive is a column here. 1 and 0 are the values. Okay, and again I'm using count star, the count. So this is how you can use group by. Now let's talk about conditions again. So we talked about conditions here using where. Let's talk about conditions again. So what I want to do here is, let's go back to this query. So you can see that there were two groups, male 426, female 227. Let's say if I want to apply a condition on this group, gender column, that whichever group has more than 400 count, let's display that. So that's what I want to do here. Okay. So this is what I mentioned. Everything is same. And in the where statement, I've added another condition that the count column should be greater than 400. Okay. And group by gender. Everything remains same. Just added one more condition because I want more than 400 group. So people who have cleared basics, query to you, what would happen if I run this query? Maybe Chetna can answer, or Arpit, or anyone else. So you think, Chetna, the query will run? Okay. Okay. So Chetna says gender-wise entries, Nathan says will display 400, 426, Arpit says error. Okay. Arpit, you could explain why there would be an error. All right, I think I understand what Arpit is saying. So let me just quickly go ahead. So if I run this query, you see a cross here. Okay, so this will give an error. Okay, the reason it will give an error is that when you're using group by, you cannot use where for adding conditions to group. What you have to do instead is so when you use group by and you have to add a condition to the group, the clause which is to be used, or the statement that is to be used, is having. So having is similar to, let me put it as capital. Yeah. So having and where are almost similar. The difference is that having is used only for the group. So if you think of it in terms of, let's say, English language, it's something similar, right? Having is, so this group having this. So that's how you can remember. So then I add a semicolon, and if I run it, male 426. So this is an important part, very important. And again, an exact question for the exam. This is where you can read it from. Put in a link here. I can probably share it with you. So difference between where and having clause. This is important. And again, these are just basic queries which you should be knowing. There are more variations to it. Okay, and the only way all of us could learn is, if we start solving those questions and you ask us those questions, and then we try to resolve them. But yeah, in the most basic sense, this is what it would be. Okay. Right. So if you remember earlier, I mentioned priority of clauses. Now it's time to revise that priority again. So if you remember, I talked about the priority of clauses. First thing comes from, then where, which is, it remains same. What is now added is group by. Then comes group by, and whenever there is group by, after that they will be coming having the conditions for group by, and the rest of them remain same. So basically group by and having, they have come in between. This is how the priority, this is how the SQL will execute the commands. So again, the logic is that the display will be obviously last. First we'll do all the processing and the display, and then the ordering. Okay. All right. Now okay, now let's talk about the subqueries. Okay, so subquery is very simply a query within a query. All right, so we'll take a look at it on what that means. Okay, so what I'm trying to explain here is that I want to write a query. Let's say for now, let's think that I want to write a query of people who are insured but not tax compliant. Okay, people who have taken insurance but are not tax compliant. So if you look at the citizens health info table, which is given here, okay, and I run it. So citizen ID is given. This is the primary key. Again, we can get into the details of keys and everything else, super key, candidate key, at a later stage. For now, again, refer to your Excel knowledge, or let's say if you even have not worked on Excel, then you know that a unique number has to be there. Aadhaar ID is the unique number. Okay, so think of citizen ID as that ID. It's the unique number. Okay, this will not be repeated in this column. Every value would be unique. So this is important in the discussions that will follow. So you can see that in the health info table, we have the insurance taken column 0 and 1. So people who are insured would be 1. Okay, their value would be 1. Okay, and then we have the PAN info table. So if I run it, we have tax compliant. So people who are not tax compliant, their value would be 0. Again, we have citizen ID here as well. So what we need to do is, we have got these two tables. We need to combine them such that the citizen ID is able to look up values where tax compliant value is 0 and the insurance taken value is 1. Okay, that's what the objective is. Now, let's say if insurance taken value, as we can see that their values 0 and 1 here, and we want to check if how many values are there under this particular column. Is it 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or is it limited only to 0 and 1? So this is a query you can run. So as I mentioned, this is the exploratory queries. This is what probably you can do to to check the contents of the table before processing it. So what I've done here is, instead of count star, if you remember I mentioned count star to take the values, I've used another command called distinct, and I've used it on insurance taken, the column name, and then taken account of it. Okay, it looks complicated, it is not. Again, you will get a hang of it. It is a very basic query. So what this query is doing is that it will give you how many unique values are here in this particular column, which will tell me if there are values beyond 0 and 1 that I can see, or it's just 0 and 1, which means there are only two values. So let me run this. So it shows that there are only two values, which means 0 and 1 is my correct assumption, that 0 means the something is not valid, and 1 means that it is valid. 1 is compliant and 0 is not compliant. So that's what I did, when I was writing these queries for this particular session. So you can do your own analysis. And right now, okay, now back to writing the subquery. So again, subquery is introduced in one of the modules. So this is how it looks. Subquery, as I mentioned, that subquery is a query within a query. So the main query is starting with select command, and if you look at the rest of the query, you will see that there is another query starting with the select command. So this is a subquery. Okay, and I've mentioned here the comment. This is important to know, that when you write a subquery, it has to be written like a main query. Okay, so if you look at the queries that we discussed earlier, it starts with select, and then we add conditions, and then we add a semicolon. So you have to write subquery should have to be written exactly like that, except the semicolon. You don't need to add a semicolon here. So you don't need to add a semicolon here. And that is why it is showing across that there is some error. So except for that, the subquery is exactly like the main query. So okay, so now let's try to write the query of combining two tables. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to find the number of people who satisfy the condition of tax compliant equal to 0, which means not tax compliant, and insurance taken yes. Okay, so select the count from the citizens table, and this is an alias. Let me add as the aliases. I'm calling it CPI. That's what I've given it a name, and usually the aliases should be such that it is easily understood by people. So just keep that in mind. So what I'm saying is that in the PAN info, which has the tax values, where tax compliant equal to 0, that's the condition I want first, and then I say that the citizen ID within this PAN info table, because citizen ID is present in both the tables, PAN and health as well. So citizen ID in this particular table is also present in. So in is another operator, like between and in is another operator. That this particular, the citizen ID in this table is present in the citizen ID in the health table, where the insurance taken is equal to 1. So basically what this query, so if you remember in previous examples, we discussed select star, okay, which means that display all the columns. But here, all I'm saying is select citizen ID. I just want one column, citizen ID, from health info table. Okay, and when I get this citizen ID, where the insurance value is 1, I will get a table with the values of all the citizen ID, one row, just one row, one column and multiple rows. And then I would compare this citizen ID with the citizen ID of PAN info. And the other syntax which we need to take care or understand here is that this is how we write what column are we referring to. So citizen ID is present in both the tables, pan info as well as health info. So CPI dot citizen ID tells the SQL that we are referring to the column in the pan info table. Let me stop here for a while. Any questions on this? So let me run this. Let me run this first. So this is giving a count of people, 196, who are not tax compliant and have taken insurance. So again, I don't think that an exam, because it's going to be a multiple choice question, I don't think you will be asked to write it, but then you will be asked to predict the output or understand if this is a subquery or not. And the questions could be, let's say, they could probably mess up anything. So they could probably put in, I don't know, they could put in something which is, let's say, instead of, maybe they would simply remove the colon. That's what I've seen in some of the questions. And then this would give an error. So obviously the output would not be there. So you'll probably have to really look through the query, understand what the output is, and then click on the MCQ answer. Let me know if there are any questions on this.